Resident Evil 4.
Very few gaming franchises are as recognizable and well known as Resident Evil, one that spans many great games and many terrible films. And it's in no small part thanks to Shinji Mikami. Mikami is, of course, the man that created the genre-defining Resident Evil 1, and served as producer for Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and Resident Evil Code Veronica. Before his departure from Capcom, Mikami would once again take the helm and direct what would be his last Resident Evil title, Resident Evil 4. Throughout its lengthy development cycle, at least 4 iterations of RE4 were scrapped before we got the version we all know today. And with its release in 2005, RE4 made waves with its innovative game design and gameplay. But why is Resident Evil 4 held in such high esteem? And does it deserve to stand amongst the greatest games of all time? In this video, we'll take a look at what made this game great, and see how well it holds up today. From his humble beginnings as a police cadet to now special agent, Leon S. Kennedy is tasked with searching for the president's daughter in Spain. Of course, things aren't ever normal as local villagers are incredibly hostile. Upon closer inspection, you find their food is rotten and their homes have been neglected for some time, leaving you only with your speculations. Focused on finding Ashley, things become even more strange the deeper you venture. The tone of RE4 was set the moment you stepped out of the car. The opening scene was extremely effective in creating a palpable, horrifying atmosphere that helped suspend any disbelief. Your first encounter leading up to the village is spine-chilling, and once in town you find yourself immediately on the back foot in unfamiliar territory. You have no idea why the villagers are hostile, and you're not given a lot of time to react, but you do know it's either you or them. When I played it in 2005, this was the part I could not get past because it was actually too scary for my dumb kid brain. But playing it again now, I'm pleasantly surprised at how well it's held up. It still retains its horror elements and hasn't devolved into a completely cheesy mess. The game is fully voice acted with the exception of some written notes you'll find lying around, and the localization was pretty good. The writing is a bit cheesy, but it made for a good laugh. Leon's one-liners and his interactions with women are pretty much a defining trait of his now. RE4 treads a fine line as it's still very much a horror game with moments of levity, and not a comedy with some horror elements. My memories of playing this on the GameCube are a bit hazy since it's been so long, but I remember it looked really good for its time. The graphics aren't great by today's standard, but considering that the game originally came out in 2005, it holds up reasonably well. The HD textures help spruce up the landscape, but they don't make a huge difference when the trees and background objects are this low poly. Like in Code Veronica, the 3D environment is now rendered in real time, breaking the mold and pushing the technological boundary from its numbered predecessors that used pre-rendered backgrounds. The game gets a pass in the graphics department mostly because we all know it's an old game, but in all honesty, visually it's not bad at all. Now, the controls on the other hand were interesting. Coming from the remakes of RE2 and 3 from 2019 and 2020 respectively, the controls in 4 left a lot to be desired. They felt archaic, like they're from a bygone era of gaming. With initial impressions less than favorable, I did eventually get used to them. The first 2 hours had me hating the controls until I reached a point where I was like, okay, this is fine I guess. So in the end, they were fine. Tank controls meant that Leon moved relative to where he was facing and not where the camera was pointing, but it functioned fairly well overall. I never had an issue with the camera bugging out, which would have made some parts very difficult and annoying. Looking around was one thing, shooting, however, made you into a turret. You could slowly retreat and shoot, but you could not reload and walk at the same time. Maybe Leon is one of those people who can't eat and walk at the same time, which coincidentally is taboo in Japan. But if and when you get past the design quirks of the controls, it was really effective. The game literally forces you to choose between fight or flight as you aren't able to move forward and shoot at the same time, actively making you think about basic things like where to position yourself so you're never fully surrounded. Do you back into a corner where you're protected from multiple sides? If you do, you better have enough firepower to hold off the waves of deranged villagers. Or do you run around herding the enemies into a group so you can use a grenade for maximum effect? When aiming, there's no magical crosshair that sits at the center of your screen. Instead, you have to rely on a laser pointer that will only highlight if it's on your target. It's so effective in instilling a split second of uncertainty as you frantically try to aim before enemies close the distance. If you need to create some space in that frenzied panic, you can shoot certain body parts to incapacitate them. For example, shooting their legs can make them fall, or shooting their hands will make them drop their weapons. You can even shoot things they throw at you, which I've only ever done by accident. RE4 is more action-heavy than any previous Resident Evil, and that's reflective in the gameplay mechanics. Enemies can work together and will run at you, making the pace of combat faster. You can use the quick turn ability to turn 180 degrees with a single button press. This function was also used in RE Village, but it's much more important here because of the slower and frankly clunkier tank controls. There are quick time events to dodge attacks or shake off enemies that grab a hold of you. They've also added finishers for enemies on the ground, and you can hop through windows and over obstacles. RE4 has a good balance of action and horror that Resident Evil fans have come to love, but it does push the limits to just shy of becoming a full-on action game. Save rooms and certain places have typewriters which can be used to save your progress. They've removed the need for ink ribbons to save, but there's no longer a stash to store items. Inventory management comes in the form of the familiar grid-based storage system which can be upgraded along with your weapons. They've also introduced a merchant that will have items and upgrades for sale. If you've played Village, then all of this will sound really familiar as that game borrows heavily from RE4. Some might even say copies. It doesn't really matter whether you've been a longtime fan or if this is your first Resident Evil. Anyone can jump in and enjoy Resident Evil 4. RE4's story is for the most part a standalone chapter that loosely ties into the Umbrella arc. After all these years, RE4 holds up remarkably well, not only in looks, but in gameplay as well. In 2005, Resident Evil 4 set the standard and showed the world once again what a survival horror game could be, something that still stands to this day. The remakes of Resident Evil 2, 3, as well as Resident Evil 7, and especially RE Village, all draw inspiration from this iconic title. So to answer the question, does Resident Evil 4 deserve its place amongst some of the greatest games? Yes, it absolutely does. Thank you so much for watching. What are your thoughts on the original RE4, and what would you like to see in the upcoming remake of this title? I know I'm excited to see what this game could look like in the newer RE engine. Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, see ya.